The rain came down in sheets, turning the narrow path to Isabel Brennan's cottage into a river of mud. She'd been darning a hole in her only good stockings when the pounding started, desperate, arrhythmic, the kind of knocking that said someone was using their last strength. Her needle stilled. Nobody came here, not anymore. The pounding came again, harder this time, and she heard it, a choked sound that might have been her name. Isabel crossed the small room in 3 strides and yanked open the door. The man on her threshold was barely standing. Rain plastered dark hair to his skull, and blood, she could see it even in the dim lamplight, seeped through the torn fabric of his shirt. He had one hand braced against the doorframe, the other pressed to his ribs. When he lifted his head, she saw his face. Sebastian Harcourt, the Duke of Ravenscroft, the boy who'd once taught her to climb trees and steal jam tarts from the kitchen, the man who'd disappeared from her life 8 years ago without a word. Belle. His voice cracked on the nickname. They're coming. I have nowhere else. She should have slammed the door in his face, should have let him collapse in the mud and whatever hunted him find what it came for. Instead, she stood frozen, staring at him, at the sharp angles of his face that had once been softer, at eyes that held exhaustion so deep it looked like drowning. You're bleeding on my doorstep, she heard herself say. I know. I'm sorry, He swayed, catching himself. 3 days. That's all I need. They'll pass through, and I'll be gone. You'll never see me again. Never see me again. As if he hadn't already perfected that particular trick. You have some nerve. The words came out flat, years of carefully cultivated indifference coating each syllable. Coming here. To me. I know. Rain dripped from his chin. I know what you must think. What I deserve. But Belle, I swear to you, don't. She gripped the edge of the door until her knuckles went white. Don't call me that. He flinched as if she'd struck him. Good. Let him hurt the way she had when his mother destroyed everything, when he'd chosen silence over defending her family. Behind him, in the distance, she heard it. Hoofbeats on the road, still far but approaching. His head turned sharply toward the sound, and she saw fear flash across his face, raw and real. Please. The word was barely a whisper. I'm begging you. Isabel Brennan was not a woman who forgave easily. She'd spent 8 years building walls around the soft parts of herself, fortifying every vulnerable corner until nothing could touch her. She'd learned to live alone, to need no one, to wear her anger like armor. But she'd also spent the first 18 years of her life knowing Sebastian Harcourt, had memorized the cadence of his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he was truly happy, the particular quality of silence when he was thinking hard about something. And she knew, bone deep and certain, what it looked like when he was terrified. You deserve whatever's hunting you, she said. Then she stepped aside. He stumbled past her into the cottage, bringing the smell of rain and copper with him. She shut the door, threw the bolt, and turned to find him leaning against her table, chest heaving. Thank you, he managed. Belle, Sit down before you bleed all over my floor. She moved to the basin, started pumping water into it with sharp, angry motions. And don't thank me. You don't get to thank me. He lowered himself into the chair slowly, like a man 3 times his age. Up close, under lamplight, she could see more damage. Bruises blooming across his jaw, a cut above his eyebrow, and whatever was wrong with his ribs that made him move so carefully. Who did this to you? The question came out before she could stop it, and she hated herself for asking, for caring even that much. Men who want me dead. He tried to shrug, winced. Or imprisoned. I'm not sure which would be worse. What did you do? Nothing. He laughed, a bitter sound that had no humor in it. Everything, does it matter? They're calling me a traitor. Say I conspired against the crown, but the truth is I'm just inconvenient. My cousin wants my title, and he found people willing to help him get it. Isabel wrung out a cloth, brought it to the table. Take off your shirt. Belle. It's Isabel. She kept her voice hard. You lost the right to familiarity years ago. Now, take off your shirt before you pass out, and I have to cut it off you. He held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then his hands went to the buttons of his waistcoat, fumbling with them. His fingers were shaking. She batted his hands away. Her own hands were steadier as she worked the buttons free, pushed the fabric off his shoulders. The shirt beneath was ruined, stuck to his skin with blood. She peeled it away carefully, and he sucked in a sharp breath. The wound along his ribs was ugly but shallow. A blade had caught him, laid open the skin in a line that would scar. She pressed the cloth to it, and he went rigid under her touch. "Hold this," she ordered. "Press hard." He obeyed, and she moved to find her needle and thread, the bottle of whiskey she kept for winter colds. When she returned, he was staring at nothing, jaw tight. "This will hurt," she said, uncorking the whiskey. "Good." His voice was hollow. "I deserve that too." She poured the alcohol over the wound, and he made a sound low in his throat but didn't move. She threaded her needle, the same one she'd been using on stockings moments before, and began to stitch. Her stitches were neat and efficient, learned from years of mending fabric. His skin was harder to pierce, but her hands didn't shake. She worked in silence, hyper-aware of how close she was to him, of the heat radiating from his body, despite the cold rain he'd brought in with him. "You've changed," he said quietly. She didn't look up. People do, especially when the world decides they're worth nothing. "Belle, Isabel, I need you to know—" "Don't!" The word came out sharp as the needle in her hand. "Don't explain. Don't apologize. I agreed to 3 days, not a confession. I discovered the truth 5 years ago." He said it anyway, words tumbling out like he'd been holding them in too long. "About what my mother did. The lies she told, the money she planted in your mother's room. I discovered all of it." Isabel's hand stilled. 5 years. 5 years he'd known, and he'd never— "And you did nothing." Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, distant and cold. "I did nothing," he confirmed, and the self-loathing in those 3 words was almost tangible. "I told myself the damage was done, that coming forward would only create scandal without fixing anything, that I couldn't undo what she'd already destroyed." He drew in a careful breath. "But the truth is I was a coward. I chose my title, my position, my comfort over making it right, and I've hated myself for it every day since." She finished the last stitch, knotted it off with hands that wanted to tremble. "Good. I don't expect forgiveness. You won't get it." She stood, moved to rinse the blood from her hands. Behind her, she heard him shifting, the whisper of fabric as he tried to maneuver his ruined shirt back on. "Leave it," she said without turning. "I'll find you something else." She went to the trunk by her bed, pulled out one of her father's old shirts. He'd left his work clothes behind when they'd moved to the city. It would fit Sebastian well enough. She tossed it to him. "Thank you. Stop saying that." She returned to cleaning up, gathering the bloody cloth and ruined shirt. "You're staying in here, I'll take the bed." She gestured to the single room's layout, one bed in the corner, the chair and table, a fireplace. "There's no privacy, so you'll have to make peace with that. I can sleep on the floor. You can sleep in the chair." She pointed to the worn armchair by the fireplace. "And in the morning we establish rules. But right now I'm tired, and you look half dead, so we're done talking." She moved toward the bed, began pulling pins from her hair with sharp, jerky movements. Behind her she heard him settle into the chair with a pained sound he tried to muffle. "Isabel." She paused, hairpins scattered across the small table by her bed. "Why did you let me in?" It was the question she'd been asking herself since the moment she stepped aside. Why? Why help him when he'd done nothing to help her? Why risk everything? Her safety, her reputation, her carefully constructed life, for a man who'd abandoned her without a fight? She didn't turn around. I don't know. But she did know. Standing in that doorway, seeing Sebastian Harcourt reduced to bleeding desperation, she'd seen something else too. The boy she'd once known. The one who'd snuck her sweets when the kitchen staff wasn't looking, who'd taught her to read before she was old enough for formal lessons, who'd looked at her like she mattered when the rest of the world looked through her. That boy had deserved her help, even if the man he'd become didn't. She climbed into bed, still wearing her dress, pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. The lamp was still burning, and she could feel him watching her across the room. "Good night, Sebastian," she said to the darkness. After a long moment she heard his response, rough with something she didn't want to name. "Good night, Belle." She didn't correct him this time. Morning came too bright through the single window. Isabel woke to unfamiliar sounds. Breathing that wasn't hers, the creak of the chair as weight shifted in it. For a disoriented moment she forgot. Then it all crashed back. Sebastian. Here. In her cottage. She sat up slowly, found him still in the chair, awake and watching her with an expression she couldn't read. In daylight he looked worse. The bruises on his face had darkened to purple, and exhaustion carved lines around his eyes. "You didn't sleep," she observed. "Neither did you, not well anyway." He straightened carefully. "You kept waking up." The intimacy of that observation, that he'd been listening to her sleep, that he'd noticed her restlessness, made something uncomfortable twist in her chest. She pushed it down. "I'll make breakfast." She swung her legs out of bed. "Then we talk." She moved through her morning routine with stiff efficiency, hyper-aware of his presence. The cottage had always been small, but with him in it, it felt impossibly tiny. Every movement brought her within arm's reach of him. When she reached past him for the teapot, her sleeve brushed his shoulder. When he stood to move out of her way, they nearly collided. "Sit," she ordered. "Stay still." He obeyed, and she tried not to notice how he watched her move around the space, tried not to remember when they were children, and he used to watch her the same way, like he was memorizing her. She scrambled eggs with more force than necessary, sliced bread with sharp precision. The silence stretched taut between them, full of 8 years of things unsaid. Finally, she set 2 plates on the table and sat across from him. "Rules." He nodded, picked up his fork. "You don't leave this cottage during daylight." She spoke without looking at him, focusing on her food. "If someone comes to the door, you hide. Under the bed, behind that screen, I don't care where, but you're invisible. I go about my life as normal. I work, I shop in the village, I maintain appearances. You're a ghost." "Understood. And when 3 days are up, you leave. No arguments, no extensions. I open my door one morning and you're gone. We never speak of this again. We never see each other again. This is the last time, Sebastian." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "The last time," he agreed quietly. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The eggs were overcooked, the bread stale. She'd meant to go to the market yesterday, but had gotten caught up in a particularly difficult mending job. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was careful. "No. Why are you here? Alone, I mean. Your parents moved to my father's family in the north 3 years ago." She set down her fork with a sharp clink. "They wanted me to come. I chose to stay." "Why?" "Because this is mine." The words came out fiercer than she'd intended. "This cottage, this life. It's small and it's nothing, but it's mine. Nobody gave it to me, nobody can take it away, and I don't have to see the pity in people's eyes every time they remember my mother was branded a thief. She wasn't. I know she wasn't." Isabel looked at him directly for the first time that morning. "I've always known. But knowing and proving are different things, aren't they? And proof doesn't matter when the damage is already done. That's what you told yourself, isn't it? 5 years ago when you found out?" He flinched. "Yes. So spare me your concern about why I'm alone." She stood, gathered the plates with shaking hands. "I'm alone because people made sure I would be. Your mother made sure, you made sure, the whole damned world made sure." She moved to the basin, started washing with violent scrubbing motions. "But I learned to prefer it. Solitude is honest. People aren't." She heard him stand, the careful way he moved closer. "Isabel, don't." Her hands stilled in the water. "Don't come closer. Don't use that tone. We're not friends anymore, Sebastian. We stopped being friends the day your mother destroyed mine and you let it happen. I didn't know the first time, no. But the second time? The third? The 100 times after that when you could have said something, done something, been something other than silent." She turned, found him closer than she'd expected, close enough to see the exact shade of his eyes. The same brown she'd once thought she'd memorized. "You knew then. You just didn't care enough." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" She lifted her chin. "You had a choice, and you chose your comfort, your position, your precious ducal responsibilities. You chose everything except the girl who'd been your friend since you were 7 years old." "I was 16 when I stopped seeing you regularly," he said, and there was heat in his voice now, the first real emotion besides exhaustion and pain. 16, Belle. Still figuring out who the hell I was supposed to be. My father was drilling duty into me every waking moment. I had tutors and obligations and you found time for parties. Her voice went deadly soft. For horse races. For courting appropriate young ladies of the ton. Funny how you found time for all of that. Because that's what was expected. And I wasn't. The words hung between them, sharp and final. I was the governess's daughter, beneath notice, not worth the risk of disappointing your parents. He stared at her, jaw working. Is that what you think? That you were beneath notice? I think I know exactly where I stood in your priorities. She turned back to the dishes. And I'm fine with it now. I've had 8 years to be fine with it. You're not fine. He was definitely closer now. She could feel the heat of him at her back. If you were fine, you wouldn't still be this angry. My anger is the only reasonable response to what happened. She kept her hands in the water, focusing on the feel of soap and ceramic. The fact that you're not angry, that you just accepted what your mother did, what the world did, says more about you than me. You think I'm not angry? His voice dropped, rough and low. I've been angry for 8 years at my mother, at myself, at a world that says someone like you, someone good and smart and worth 10 of any titled lady, doesn't deserve the same respect they do. Pretty words. Her throat felt tight. But words are easy. Action is what matters. And you didn't act. No, he agreed. I didn't. And I've paid for it. I've paid for it every day, Belle, in ways you can't imagine. Don't... She spun around and he was right there, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Don't make yourself the victim in this. You lost nothing. I lost everything. You think I lost nothing? Something desperate edged into his voice. I lost you. The one person who looked at me and saw just Sebastian, not the heir, not the future duke, not the title waiting to swallow me whole. Just me. The words hit her square in the chest, and for a moment, just a moment, she was 14 again, laughing with him in the kitchen garden, certain that whatever happened, they'd always have each other. Then reality crashed back. You gave me up. That was your choice. It was the worst choice I ever made. They stood there, too close, breathing too hard. She could see the pulse jumping in his throat, could smell rain and exhaustion, and something underneath that was just him, a scent she'd thought she'd forgotten, but apparently had memorized somewhere deep and permanent. Why did you come here? She forced herself to ask the real question. The truth. You must have other options. People who owe you favors, safe houses, resources. Why risk coming to me? He held her gaze, and she saw something crack open in his expression. Because I'm tired. I'm tired of the lies and the performance, and the weight of being Sebastian Harcourt, Duke of Ravenscroft, the most dangerous man in England. He laughed, and it was the most broken sound she'd ever heard. Do you know what that reputation is built on? Nothing. Smoke. Stories my father planted to make people fear the family, to give him leverage. I've never hurt anyone, never done half the things they whisper about. I'm not dangerous. I'm not even particularly brave. His voice cracked on the last word, and Isabel felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of one brick in the wall she'd built. I came here because you're the only person who ever knew me. He said it simply, like confession. The only person who might remember the boy I was before I became this thing. And I thought, if I'm going to lose everything, my title, my life, whatever's coming, I wanted one last moment of being just Sebastian, even if you hate me. Even if you slam the door in my face, I needed to remember what it felt like to be real. Isabel's hands were still wet from the washing water. She could feel drops sliding down her wrists, small and cold. She wanted to step back, to rebuild the distance, to remember all the very good reasons she had for keeping this man at arm's length. Instead, she heard herself say, I don't hate you. His eyes widened slightly. I want to. She forced the words out. God, I want to hate you. It would be so much easier, but I can't quite manage it, and I don't know if that makes me weak or stupid or just pathetically unable to let go. It makes you kind. His hand twitched like he wanted to reach for her, then fell back to his side. Kinder than I deserve. Yes, she agreed. It does. She stepped back, putting necessary space between them. Her heart was beating too fast, and she could feel heat in her cheeks that had nothing to do with anger. "You should rest," she said, turning away. "Your ribs need time to heal, and I have work to do." She moved to the table where her mending basket sat, pulled out the commissioned pieces she needed to finish, a lady's walking dress that needed the hem redone, 2 shirts with torn sleeves, a cloak that required new buttons. Simple work. Mindless. The kind of thing she could lose herself in. Sebastian retreated to the chair by the fireplace, and she tried to pretend she didn't feel his gaze on her as she worked. Tried to pretend the cottage didn't feel different with him in it, smaller and more cramped, but also, somehow, less empty. The morning passed in silence, broken only by the scratch of her needle and the crackle of the fire. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving everything dripping and grey. Around midday, she heard it, hoofbeats on the road. Multiple horses moving fast. Sebastian heard it too. He was on his feet before she could speak, moving toward the window with a speed that belied his injuries. "Away from there," she hissed. "Behind the screen. Now." He obeyed, disappearing behind the folding screen that sectioned off a corner of the room. Isabel forced herself to keep stitching, to look utterly absorbed in her work. The hoofbeats slowed as they approached the cottage, then stopped. She counted. 3 horses, maybe 4. Her hand wanted to shake. She steadied it. A knock at the door, firm, authoritative. She set down her mending with deliberate calm, crossed to the door, and opened it just wide enough to see out. 2 men stood on her step, both armed, both wearing the kind of clothes that said they had money and authority. Behind them, she could see 2 more mounted men scanning the surrounding area. "Yes?" She kept her voice polite, but flat. "Can I help you?" The taller of the 2 men gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good afternoon, miss. We're looking for someone. A dangerous man, possibly injured. Dark hair, tall. You haven't seen anyone matching that description?" "No." The lie came easily. "I live alone out here. Don't get many visitors. Mind if we look around?" The shorter man was already trying to peer past her into the cottage. "Yes, actually I do mind." She kept her hand on the door, her body blocking the entrance. "I'm a woman living alone. You think I'm going to let strange armed men into my home?" The tall man's smile sharpened. "We have authority from—" "I don't care whose authority you have." She lifted her chin. "Unless you have proper warrants signed by a magistrate, you're not coming in. This is my property, my home, and I know my rights." It was a bluff. She had no idea if they needed warrants or not, if her rights extended to refusing entry, but she said it with enough conviction that both men hesitated. "There's a reward," the shorter man tried. "Substantial. For information leading to the capture of Sebastian Harcourt, Duke of Ravenscroft, accused of treason and conspiracy against the crown. Well, if I see a duke, I'll be sure to let you know." She started to close the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish." "Miss—" She shut the door firmly, threw the bolt and stood there with her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Through the crack in the doorframe she watched them confer, watched them walk the perimeter of the cottage. They were out there for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes. Finally, mercifully, they mounted up and rode on. She waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely before she moved away from the door. Her legs felt shaky. She pressed her hands flat against the rough wood, willing herself steady. "They're gone," she said without turning around. She heard him emerge from behind the screen, heard his careful footsteps approaching. "Belle?" "Treason and conspiracy against the crown." She turned to face him. "You said it was your cousin wanting your title. You didn't mention the crown was involved." "Because it's not really." He looked pale, drawn. "Marcus, my cousin, he has connections, people who owe him favors. They're using the crown's authority, but it's not a real charge, it's theater. A way to force me out without having to actually prove anything. And if they catch you, what happens then?" He met her eyes, and she saw the truth there even before he spoke it. "They won't let it go to trial. Too many questions. Too much risk I might actually defend myself successfully. No, if they catch me, I'll have an unfortunate accident, a fall from a horse, a robbery gone wrong. Something neat and final." The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, made her stomach turn. "You're talking about murder. I'm talking about an inconvenient duke being removed so a more accommodating one can take his place." He moved back to the chair, lowered himself into it carefully. "Welcome to aristocracy, Belle, where everything is civilized right up until it's not." She stared at him, at this man who'd once been her closest friend, who'd laughed at her jokes and defended her from bullies, and made her believe, for a few precious years, that maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it seemed. How did this happen? The question came out softer than she'd intended. "How did you become this?" "I stopped fighting." He leaned his head back against the chair, closed his eyes. "My father spent 20 years turning me into what he thought a duke should be. Hard, distant, effective. And I let him because fighting was exhausting, and I didn't know what I was fighting for anymore. Then he died, and I inherited all his debts, financial, political, moral, including enemies who were just waiting for their chance. And now I'm paying for every compromise I made, every time I chose the easy path, every time I stayed silent when I should have spoken." He opened his eyes, looked at her. "Every time I lost someone I shouldn't have lost." The weight in those last words pressed against her chest. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to hear him say it explicitly, but she was afraid of what it might change, afraid of what it might mean, afraid of feeling anything other than the clean, simple anger she'd wrapped around herself like armor. "You need to eat," she said instead, retreating to safer ground. "I'll make something." She busied herself with food preparation, trying not to think about the men who'd stood on her doorstep, trying not to imagine what would happen if they came back, trying not to feel the weight of Sebastian's gaze following her around the small space. But mostly, she was trying not to think about the moment by the basin, about how close they'd stood, about the desperate honesty in his voice when he said he'd lost her, about the traitorous part of herself that wanted to close that distance and see what would happen. 3 days, she reminded herself. 3 days and he'd be gone, and her life would return to its careful, lonely normal. She could survive 3 days of anything. The afternoon stretched into evening. Isabel worked on her mending while Sebastian dozed fitfully in the chair. She could tell he wasn't really sleeping, just resting his eyes, his body still wound tight with tension. Around sunset, she made a simple dinner of soup and bread. They ate in that same loaded silence, and she found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, cataloguing the changes 8 years had wrought. He was broader through the shoulders now, his hands rough with calluses she didn't remember. There were small scars she didn't recognize, one along his jaw, another on his forearm. The softness of youth had been carved away, leaving angles and edges. Even exhausted and injured, he moved with a controlled precision that spoke of discipline drilled deep. But his eyes were the same. That warm brown that had always reminded her of honey, of autumn, of home. She'd forgotten that. Or maybe she'd deliberately not let herself remember. "You're staring," he said without looking up from his soup. "I'm not." She was. "I'm just... You look different. So do you." He did look up then, and there was something in his gaze that made her pulse quicken. "You were pretty when we were children. Now you're..." He trailed off, shook his head. "Never mind." "I'm what?" "Beautiful." He said it simply, like fact. "You're beautiful, Belle. And before you snap at me for saying it, I'm not trying to flatter you or manipulate you. I'm just stating the obvious." Heat crept up her neck. She wanted to dismiss it, to mock him for trying such a transparent tactic. But the way he said it, tired and honest and a little sad, didn't feel like manipulation. "Don't," she said anyway, because accepting compliments from him felt dangerous. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Look at me like that. Talk to me like that." She set down her spoon with a sharp click. "I'm not 16 anymore, Sebastian. I'm not going to blush and simper because you noticed I grew up." "I know you're not 16. His voice dropped. 16-year-old Belle would have probably stabbed me by now. 26-year-old Isabel has more self-control. Don't be so sure about that." But despite herself, she felt her mouth twitch, almost a smile. She forced it down. They finished eating in silence. She washed up while he fed more wood to the fire. The domesticity of it felt surreal. 2 people moving around each other in practiced synchronization, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. When full dark came, the cottage felt even smaller. There was nowhere to look that wasn't him, nowhere to move that didn't bring them into proximity. She tried to focus on the simple task of preparing for bed, but she was intensely aware of him watching her brush out her hair, of the intimacy inherent in these small rituals performed in shared space. "Can I ask you something?" His voice came soft through the dimness. "You're going to anyway. Why didn't you marry?" She stilled, brush halfway through a section of hair. "Excuse me. You're 26. Beautiful, intelligent. In any fair world, you'd have had dozens of offers." He shifted in the chair. "So, why are you still alone? You mean, besides my mother being falsely branded a thief and my reputation being ruined by association?" She resumed, brushing sharp strokes. "Or besides the fact that I have no dowry, no connections, no prospects? Take your pick. That's not what I meant, isn't it?" She turned to face him. "You think men were lining up to court the governess's disgraced daughter, the girl whose family was run out of your estate. People remember, Sebastian. They remember, and they talk, and they make sure everyone knows I'm not suitable. Not for marriage, not for anything respectable. There must have been someone." His jaw was tight. In 8 years, someone must have seen past all that. There had been. One man, the son of a merchant, who'd courted her for 3 months when she was 22. He'd been kind, pleasant, unremarkable. She'd been prepared to say yes when he asked. Then he'd heard the full story of her mother's dismissal. He'd been gone within a week. "What does it matter to you?" She set the brush down with deliberate care. "Why do you care if I'm alone?" "Because I—" He stopped himself, looked away. "Because you deserve better than this. Better than a cottage at the edge of nowhere with no company and no prospects. You deserve a full life, Belle. A happy one." "Maybe this is my happy life." She heard the defensive edge in her voice. "Maybe I chose this." "Did that occur to you? That I might prefer solitude to settling for someone who'd always see me as less than? That I might have decided my own company is better than tolerating a husband who'd never quite forget where I came from? Is it?" He looked at her again, and there was challenge in it now. "Is this really what you want? Or is it just what you've convinced yourself to want because wanting anything else hurts too much?" The accusation hit too close. "You don't get to analyze me. You don't get to waltz back into my life after 8 years and presume to know what I feel or want or need. You're right." He stood, moved closer, and she saw him wince as his injured ribs protested. "I don't get to presume anything. But I can see, Belle. I can see you've built walls so high you've trapped yourself inside them, and I recognize it because I've done the same thing. We are not the same." "No," he agreed. "You built your walls to keep people out. I built mine to keep myself in. But we're both alone, and we're both pretending it's what we wanted." She wanted to argue, wanted to throw his words back in his face and tell him he was wrong, that he knew nothing about her life or her choices. But standing there in the firelight, seeing the exhaustion and honesty in his face, she couldn't quite make the words come. "I'm tired," she said instead. "We should sleep." He nodded, retreated to his chair without argument. She climbed into her bed, still wearing her day dress, pulled the blanket up and stared at the ceiling. "Belle?" "What?" "Thank you. For today. For lying to those men. For keeping me safe." A pause. "You didn't have to." "No," she agreed quietly. "I didn't." "Why did you?" It was the same question as last night, and she still didn't have a good answer. Or rather, she had too many answers, all of them tangled up with feelings she didn't want to examine. "Because you were right," she finally said. "I'm not fine, I'm angry and I'm hurt and I probably will be for a long time, but apparently I'm not angry enough to let them take you, so don't make me regret it." She heard him shift in the chair, heard the soft exhalation that might have been relief or pain or something else entirely. "Good night, Belle." "Good night." She lay awake long after his breathing evened out into something approaching sleep. Through the darkness, she could just make out his shape in the chair, the line of his shoulders, the angle of his head. 8 years ago, she'd thought she'd memorized everything about him, thought she'd carried the knowledge of Sebastian Harcourt like a secret treasure. But the boy she'd known was gone. In his place was this man, complicated and damaged and somehow still devastatingly familiar. And she didn't know what scared her more, that he'd changed so much, or that despite everything, she still recognized him. That despite 8 years and betrayal and all the very good reasons to keep her distance, some part of her still wanted to close the space between them and see if the boy she'd loved was still somewhere inside the Duke she barely knew. The second day dawned grey and cold. Isabel woke to find Sebastian already up, standing by the window and staring out at nothing. His shirt, her father's shirt, hung loose on his frame, and in the morning light she could see just how much weight he'd lost, how the last weeks or months had worn him down to something sharp and precarious. "You're awake early," she said, sitting up. "Couldn't sleep." He didn't turn from the window. "Keep thinking they'll come back, that they'll figure out I'm here." "They won't." She hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. "They're moving on, following other leads. You're safe here. For now." He finally looked at her, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. "But 2 more days, Belle. Then I need to move again." "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet." He rubbed a hand over his face. "South, probably. Find a port town, get passage to the continent, start over somewhere they won't think to look." "Run forever, you mean?" "What other choice do I have?" She threw back the blanket, stood. "You could fight." He laughed, bitter. "Fight with what?" "I have no allies left, no resources. Marcus has been methodically dismantling everything my father built for years, turning people against me, planting stories. The man everyone thinks I am, the dangerous Duke of Ravenscroft who'd do anything to keep power, that man could fight. But I'm not him, I've never been him. Then stop being him." She moved to the basin, started her morning washing. "Stop playing the role they wrote for you. Stop letting them control the narrative." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" She turned to face him, hands dripping. "You said it yourself, that reputation is smoke, so blow it away. Stop pretending to be something you're not." "And reveal what? That I'm weak? That I've spent 32 years being whatever people expected, instead of figuring out who I actually am?" His voice rose. "That's not strength, Belle. That's pathetic." "No." She crossed to him, stood her ground even when he tried to turn away. "What's pathetic is running. What's pathetic is accepting defeat before you've even tried to fight. You think I don't know what it's like to have the world tell you you're nothing, to have people look at you and see only what they've decided you must be. It's not the same." "It's exactly the same." She poked him in the chest, ignoring his wince. "The difference is, I didn't have a choice. I couldn't run to the continent. I couldn't start over with a new name and unlimited resources. I had to stay and survive and build a life out of the scraps they left me. So don't you dare stand there and tell me it's too hard." He caught her wrist, held it there against his chest. She could feel his heart racing under her palm, could see something wild and desperate moving behind his eyes. "You want to know the real reason I came here?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "It wasn't just for safety. It wasn't just to remember what it felt like to be real. I came here because you're the only person who ever expected nothing from me except honesty. And I thought, I hoped, that maybe if I could find my way back to you, I could find my way back to myself." Her wrist was still caught in his grip, her palm still pressed to his chest. She should pull away, should rebuild the distance, should remember all the ways he'd failed her. But his heart was thundering against her hand, and his eyes held something raw and real that made her own heart stutter. "And did you?" Her voice came out softer than she meant. "Find yourself." "I found anger." He let her go, stepped back. "I found 8 years of compromises I can't undo and choices I can't unmake. I found a man I don't particularly like who's wearing my face and carrying my name. Then change." The words came fierce. "Stop accepting what you've become and choose something different. You have 2 days left here, Sebastian. 2 days to figure out who you actually want to be. And if I don't know, then start with what you do know." She moved back to the basin, needing the distance, needing to do something with her hands. "You know what you're not. You're not the dangerous man they claim. You're not the villain in their story. So who are you?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I'm the boy who used to steal jam tarts with you, who taught you to climb trees and read Latin, who thought—" He stopped, started again. Who thought maybe someday when we were older, and the world made more sense, you and I might— He didn't finish, didn't need to. The words hung between them, heavy with implications she wasn't ready to touch. We were children, she said, focusing intently on her washing. Children imagine all sorts of impossible things. Was it impossible? He moved closer, and she could see him in her peripheral vision. Really? Or did I just make it impossible by being too much of a coward to fight for it? Don't. Her hands stilled in the water. Don't do this. Do what? Rewrite history. Make it romantic. We were friends, Sebastian, that's all. Is that really what you remember? He was right behind her now, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Because I remember watching you braid your hair and thinking you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I remember the way you laughed at my stupid jokes and made me feel like maybe I wasn't just a title waiting to happen. I remember being 15 and wanting to kiss you so badly it physically hurt, and being terrified you'd laugh at me if I tried. She spun to face him, and he was even closer than she'd thought. So why didn't you? Because I was 15 and stupid and scared. His eyes searched hers. And then I was 16 and being told in no uncertain terms that the daughter of the governess was not an appropriate connection. And by 17, I'd convinced myself that whatever I felt for you was just childhood infatuation that I needed to grow out of. And did you? She shouldn't ask, shouldn't want to know. Grow out of it? No. The word was simple, final. I just got very good at pretending I had. Isabel's breath caught. They were standing too close again, and this time she'd been the one to turn toward him to close the distance. She could see the pulse in his throat, the way his chest rose and fell with careful breaths, the exact color of his eyes in morning light. Sebastian, I know. He lifted a hand like he might touch her face, then let it fall. I know you're angry. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I'm not asking for forgiveness or second chances or anything else I haven't earned. I needed you to know. Before I disappear again, I needed you to know that losing you wasn't some minor inconvenience in my life. It broke something in me that never quite healed. Her heart was doing complicated things in her chest, racing and stuttering and threatening to crack open feelings she'd worked 8 years to bury. You're the one who left? I know, and I've regretted it every single day since. They stood there frozen in that moment, while the cottage's single window let in grey morning light and the fire crackled in its hearth. She could lean forward, just a few inches, and close the gap. Could give in to the pull she'd been fighting since he collapsed on her doorstep, but giving in would mean forgetting, forgiving, opening herself up to being hurt again by the one person who'd already proven he could destroy her. She stepped back. I need to go to the village. Belle, I need supplies, food, thread for the mending. She moved to grab her cloak from its peg, wrapping it around herself like armor. You stay here, stay hidden. I'll be back before noon. Wait. But she was already out the door, closing it firmly behind her, walking away from the cottage and the complicated man inside it before she could change her mind. The walk to the village gave her time to breathe, to think, to remember why she'd built her walls in the first place. Because letting people in meant giving them power to hurt you, and Sebastian Harcourt had already proven he'd used that power, even if he didn't mean to. She reached the village's main street and immediately noticed something wrong. People were gathered in small groups, talking in low, urgent voices. Mrs. Hemsworth, who ran the bakery, was shaking her head at something Mr. Cole was saying. What's happened? Isabel approached the nearest group. Haven't you heard? Young Thomas, the blacksmith's apprentice, turned to her with wide eyes. They're saying the Duke of Ravenscroft is around here somewhere, wanted for treason. There's men searching every property, offering £1,000 for information. Her blood went cold. £1,000? Can you imagine? Mrs. Hemsworth had joined them, flour still dusting her apron. That's more money than any of us will see in a lifetime. They're saying he's dangerous, though. That he's killed before. That he'll do anything to avoid capture. Isabel forced herself to look mildly interested rather than terrified. Sounds like nonsense to me. A duke here? Why would someone like that hide in a place like this? That's what I said. Mr. Cole nodded vigorously. But they're thorough, I'll give them that. Checked my barn top to bottom this morning. Scared the chickens half to death. They'll probably make their way to your cottage soon enough, Miss Brennan. Thomas added. "Living out there alone like you do. Perfect hiding spot, they might think." Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "I suppose they might. Though they'll be disappointed. It's just me and my mending." She made her purchases quickly, mind racing. They were conducting thorough searches. They'd come to her cottage. And when they did, Sebastian, she needed to get back, needed to warn him. But rushing would look suspicious, so she forced herself to maintain a steady pace, to exchange pleasantries with Mrs. Hemsworth about the weather, to act like everything was perfectly normal. By the time she reached the cottage, her nerves were frayed thin. She burst through the door to find Sebastian standing in the middle of the room, holding something in his hand. One of her mother's old handkerchiefs, embroidered with initials she'd recognize anywhere. "You kept this?" His voice was odd, strained. "We have a problem." She set down her basket. "They're doing house-to-house searches, thorough ones. They'll be here, probably today." He looked up at her, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Fury. "Your mother's handkerchief, the one she embroidered the year she was teaching me letters. You kept it all this time." "Sebastian, did you hear me? They're coming." "Why?" He moved toward her, holding out the delicate square of fabric like an accusation. "Why keep something like this? Why torture yourself with reminders?" It's not," she faltered, caught off guard by the sudden shift. "It's just a handkerchief." "It's not just a handkerchief." His voice was rising now, anger she'd never heard from him bleeding through. "It's proof that you've been carrying this around for 8 years, that you never let go. That despite everything you said about being fine and preferring solitude, you've been holding on to pieces of a past that hurt you. So what if I have?" Her own anger sparked in response. "So what if I kept a few things? That's my business." "It's cowardice." He threw the handkerchief on the table. "You stand there and lecture me about running, about being too scared to fight. But you're doing the same thing. You're hiding in this cottage with your anger and your loneliness and your precious memories, too scared to actually try to build something new. How dare you? You want to know why you're alone?" He stepped closer, and there was something wild in his eyes now. "It's not because of what my mother did. It's not because of your reputation. It's because you're terrified. You're terrified that if you let someone in, they'll leave. So you reject them first. You push them away and tell yourself it's because you're too strong to settle, when really you're just too scared to risk it." The words hit like physical blows. "You don't know anything about me, don't I? I see you, Belle. I see exactly what you're doing because I've been doing the same thing. We're both so scared of being hurt that we've made ourselves into fortresses, and we're both dying inside those walls. Get out." Her voice shook. "Get out of my cottage." Finally. Something like satisfaction crossed his face. Finally, some honesty. "You want me gone? Fine, but at least admit it's not because you're practical or protecting yourself. It's because I scare you. Because what you felt for me when we were young, what you might still feel now, that terrifies you more than anything." "You're wrong." "Am I?" He was in front of her now, breathing hard. "Then look me in the eye and tell me you feel nothing. Tell me that having me here doesn't make you want things you've convinced yourself you can't have. Tell me you don't lie awake at night, wondering what would have happened if I'd been braver, if you'd been braver, if we'd both fought for what we felt, instead of running from it." She couldn't form the words, couldn't force the lie past her lips, because he was right, damn him. He was right about all of it, and she hated him for seeing through her so clearly. "I hate you," she whispered. "No, you don't." His voice gentled slightly. "You want to, but you don't." They stood there, two people who'd known each other their whole lives, finally seeing each other without armor, without pretense, without the comfortable lies they'd both been telling themselves. And it was too much, too raw, too honest, too dangerous. "They're coming here," she said again, forcing her voice steady. "Today, probably. You need to hide somewhere better than behind a screen. The barn, maybe. Or the root cellar." "Belle, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't say anything else. Just, we'll figure out how to hide you. We'll get through this. And then tomorrow, or the day after, you'll leave. And we'll never see each other again. That's the deal." He stared at her for a long moment, jaw working. Then, finally, he nodded. The root cellar. They spent the next hour preparing. The root cellar was accessed through a trap door in the floor, disguised under a worn rug. It was small, damp and dark, barely large enough for a man to crouch in, but it was hidden. Unless someone knew exactly where to look, they'd never find it. Isabel gathered supplies, water, some bread, a blanket. Sebastian watched her work with an expression she couldn't read. "How long do I stay down there?" he asked. "As long as it takes. I'll come get you when they're gone." She handed him the supplies. "And Sebastian, stay quiet, no matter what you hear." He took the items from her, fingers brushing hers. "Belle, about what I said later." She couldn't handle more honesty right now. "Just hide." He descended into the cellar, and she lowered the trap door, repositioned the rug, scattered her mending basket artfully across it. By the time she was done, there was no sign anything was amiss. She forced herself to sit, to pick up her sewing, to look utterly absorbed in her work. The knock came an hour later. She counted to 3 before standing, schooled her features into mild annoyance, and opened the door. The same 2 men from yesterday stood there, along with 2 others. The tall one gave her a smile that was all teeth. "Miss Brennan, we're conducting official searches of all properties in the area. I'm afraid we'll need to look through your cottage. Do you have a warrant this time?" He produced a paper, unfolded it with a flourish. She didn't know enough about legal documents to tell if it was real or fabricated, but it looked official enough. "Fine," she stepped aside, "but make it quick. I have work to finish." They filed in, and she watched with forced calm as they searched. They opened her trunk, rifled through her clothes, checked behind the screen. One of them poked at the fireplace, as if expecting to find a duke hiding in the chimney. Another examined the window frames. The tall one, the leader, stood in the center of the room, slowly turning, eyes scanning every surface. His gaze landed on the rug where her mending basket sat. "What's under there?" He pointed. Her heart stopped. "Under where?" "The rug. What's beneath it?" "Floor." She kept her voice flat, bored. "Wood floor. Same as everywhere else." He moved toward it, and she forced herself not to react, forced herself to keep sewing, to look mildly irritated rather than terrified. He kicked at the corner of the rug. "Move your basket, if you insist." She set down her work with deliberate slowness, crossed to the basket, picked it up. The rug lay flat, showing nothing but floor. The man knelt, ran his hands over the boards. She held her breath. His fingers traced the edges of the trapdoor. She could see the exact moment he felt the seam. "There's something here." He looked up at his companions. "A door of some kind." "It's a root cellar." She forced exasperation into her voice. "For storing vegetables. You're welcome to check it, but I warn you, it hasn't been opened in months. Smells like death and rot down there." "Open it." The command was sharp. She made a show of reluctance, bent down, found the iron ring and pulled. The door came up with a groan of protest. The smell that wafted out was indeed foul: damp earth, decay, stagnant water. The man pulled out a lantern, lit it, and lowered it into the opening. Isabel's nails dug into her palms as she watched the light play over the cellar's interior. Empty, completely, utterly empty. The man swept the light around once more, grunted, and pulled back. Nothing. Just like she said, rot and waste. He let the door fall closed with a bang. Isabel wanted to collapse with relief, but forced herself to remain standing, to look vindicated rather than terrified. "Satisfied?" she asked coolly. The leader stood, brushed dirt from his knees. "For now. But we'll be watching, Miss Brennan. This cottage is isolated, perfect for hiding. If you see anything suspicious, you report it immediately, understand?" "Perfectly." She moved to open the door wider, a clear invitation for them to leave. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish, and you've wasted enough of my time." They filed out, but the leader paused on the threshold. £1,000 is a lot of money, enough to change a life. Think about it. "I'll be sure to do that," she said flatly, and shut the door in his face. She waited, counted to 100, then 200, before she moved. Her hands were shaking as she pulled up the trapdoor again. The cellar was empty. No Sebastian, no supplies, nothing but damp earth and shadows. Her heart lurched into her throat. Where? Then she saw it, a narrow gap in the cellar's wall, barely visible in the darkness. A second chamber, so small it would be invisible unless you knew to look for it. The cottage had been built over an old well shaft, long since dried up and forgotten. "Sebastian!" She whispered it into the darkness. A moment later, he emerged from the gap, filthy and pale but alive. She helped him out of the cellar, and he stood there in her cottage, breathing hard. "How did you know?" she asked. "I didn't, when I went down there I felt the draft. Realized there was more space than there should be, so I took a chance." She was suddenly intensely aware of how close he was, of the adrenaline still singing through her veins, of the fact that they'd just survived something that could have ended very badly. "They're gone," she said unnecessarily. "Yes, you're safe. Because of you." He reached out, cupped her face in his filthy hands. "Belle, you just risked everything. If they'd found me, if they'd realized you were lying. But they didn't. But they could have." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Why risk it? The truth sat on her tongue, dangerous and real. "Because I couldn't watch them take you, because despite everything, some part of me still—" She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't thought through. She just closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his, tasting desperation and relief and 8 years of wanting things she'd told herself she couldn't have. He made a sound, surprise or need, she couldn't tell, and then he was kissing her back, his hands sliding into her hair, pulling her closer. It was nothing like the innocent first kiss they might have shared at 15. This was raw and honest, and full of all the complicated feelings they'd been dancing around. When they drew apart at last, both unsteady, he rested his forehead against hers. "Belle, don't." She kept her eyes closed. "Don't say anything. Don't make this into something more than it is. I was scared, and you were here, and it wasn't just anything." His voice was rough. "And you know it." She did know it. That was the problem. That was what terrified her. She pulled back, put necessary distance between them. "You need to wash. You're covered in dirt." "Belle, we need to talk about what just happened." "No." She moved to the basin with shaking hands. "We don't. In fact, we're going to pretend it didn't happen. You're leaving tomorrow. That was always the plan. This doesn't change anything." "Doesn't it?" She spun to face him. "What do you want me to say, Sebastian? That kissing you changed everything? That suddenly 8 years of hurt and abandonment don't matter? That I should just, run away with you, build a life with a man who's running from treason charges? I want you to admit you feel something." He stepped toward her. "Anything. I want you to stop hiding behind anger and practicality and tell me the truth." "The truth?" Her voice rose. "The truth is, I'm terrified. I'm terrified that if I let myself feel what I'm feeling, you'll disappear again. Or worse, they'll find you, and I'll have to watch them take you away. The truth is that caring about you hurts, Sebastian. It's always hurt. And I won't do this to myself again." "So that's it?" Something broke in his expression. "You're just going to send me away tomorrow and spend the rest of your life alone because you're too scared to take a chance?" "I'm not scared. You're the most scared person I've ever met." He said it gently, like a wound. "And I understand why. God, Belle, I understand. But at some point you have to decide if protecting yourself is worth never having anything real." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't scared, that her choices were about strength, not fear. But the words wouldn't come because deep down she knew he was right. She was terrified. Terrified of wanting him, terrified of losing him, terrified of letting herself hope for something that might be snatched away. "I need air." She grabbed her cloak. "I'm going for a walk. You, just stay here." She was out the door before he could respond, walking fast toward the woods behind her cottage. She needed space, needed to think without him watching her with those eyes that saw too much. The woods were quiet, peaceful. She walked until her breathing steadied, until the panic receded enough to think clearly. What did she want? It was the question she'd been avoiding since the moment he collapsed on her doorstep. What did she actually want? To be safe, yes. To protect herself from hurt, absolutely. But was that the same as wanting to be happy? She thought of her life before he'd arrived, the careful routine, the solitary meals, the nights spent alone with only her thoughts for company. She'd convinced herself it was enough. That independence was the same as fulfillment. But having him here, even for 2 days, had reminded her what it felt like to share space with someone who understood her, to laugh, to argue, to feel the particular electricity of attraction and connection, to feel alive instead of just surviving. A sound behind her made her turn. Sebastian stood at the edge of the trees, and even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I'm leaving tonight," he said without preamble. "I can't stay until tomorrow. It's not safe for you." Her heart lurched. "What?" "They're watching. You were right about that, and if I stay, they'll come back, and next time they might not be so easily fooled." He moved closer. "So I'm leaving tonight as soon as it's dark. I'll go south, find a port, disappear, and you'll be safe." "I never said I wanted safe." The words came out before she could think them through. He stopped walking. "What?" "I said—" She took a breath, forced herself to be honest. "I never said I wanted to be safe, Sebastian. I said I was afraid. Those aren't the same thing." "I don't understand." "Neither do I." She laughed, slightly hysterical. "I don't understand what I'm feeling or what I want or how to reconcile the fact that I'm furious with you and terrified for you and—" She broke off, shook her head. "You were right. I've been hiding. I've been so focused on protecting myself from getting hurt again that I forgot how to actually live." He closed the remaining distance between them. "Belle, let me finish." She held up a hand. "You came here looking for yourself, looking for the boy you used to be. Well, I've been doing the same thing. I've been holding on to who I was, the girl you abandoned, the victim of your mother's cruelty, because it was easier than figuring out who I could be. Who do you want to be?" It was the right question, the only question that mattered. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know I don't want to be someone who sends you away just because I'm scared of what might happen if I ask you to stay." His eyes widened. "You're asking me to stay?" "No." She forced herself to hold his gaze. "I'm asking you to fight. Not for your title or your reputation or your life. For us. For the chance we never got when we were young. For the possibility that maybe, despite everything that's happened, we could still—" He kissed her this time, cutting off her words with his lips. It was different from the desperate kiss in the cottage, slower, deeper, full of promise instead of fear. When they broke apart, he was smiling, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since he'd arrived. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I don't know how to fight this. Running is all I've done for months." "Then stop running." She threaded her fingers through his. "You said your cousin wants your title, so give it to him." He blinked. "What?" "Give it to him." She spoke slowly, the plan forming as she said it. "He orchestrated all of this to force you out, to take what he thinks is rightfully his. So stop fighting him for it. Renounce the title, publicly. Make a spectacle of it. Declare yourself unworthy or unwilling or whatever you need to say. Once you're not the Duke anymore, his entire conspiracy becomes pointless." "Belle, it's not that simple. There are laws, procedures." "Are there?" she challenged. "Or is that just what you've been told? You're the Duke. If you want to abdicate in favor of your heir, can anyone actually stop you?" He was quiet for a long moment, turning the idea over. "No," he finally said. "I don't think they could. It would be unprecedented, certainly. Scandalous. But legally, I don't think there's anything preventing it. So do it." She squeezed his hands. "Walk away from everything that's been killing you. Choose something different. Choose yourself. And what would I do? I've been trained for nothing except being a duke. I have no other skills, no other purpose. You'll figure it out." She said it with more confidence than she felt. "We'll figure it out, together, if you want to. If I want to." He pulled her closer until there was no space between them. "Belle, I've wanted that since I was 15 years old, but I need you to understand what you're offering. No title means no money, no position, no security. It means starting over with nothing. Are you sure that's what you want?" Was she? Was she willing to give up the careful, safe life she'd built for the terrifying uncertainty of building something new with him? She thought of her cottage, her solitary meals, her quiet existence. Thought of growing old alone with nothing but memories and regret for company. Then she thought of Sebastian's smile when they were children, the way he'd looked at her this morning, like she was the only real thing in his world. The possibility of building something honest and true, even if it was difficult. "I'm sure," she said. "I'm terrified, but I'm sure. Then we do it together." He rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow, I'll go to the village, make a public declaration, renounce the title in front of witnesses, make it official and binding so Marcus can't contest it. And then we leave. Both of us. Start fresh somewhere new." "Together," she confirmed. "Together." They stood there in the woods as evening fell around them, two people who'd found their way back to each other through years and pain and impossible circumstance. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be no happily ever after handed to them on a platter. But it was a beginning, and maybe that was enough. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Isabel woke to find Sebastian already dressed in the cleanest clothes she could provide, still her father's old things, but respectable enough. "You're sure about this?" she asked as she braided her hair. "No," he smiled at her through the small mirror. "But I'm doing it anyway." They walked to the village together as the sun climbed higher. Word of their approach spread quickly. By the time they reached the main square, a crowd had gathered. She saw curiosity on faces, suspicion, recognition dawning in some eyes as people realized who was walking beside her. The tall man from the searches was there, flanked by his companions. His hand went to his weapon when he saw Sebastian. "That's him," someone in the crowd whispered. "That's the Duke. Sebastian Harcourt, Duke of Ravenscroft." The tall man's voice rang out. "You're under arrest for—" "I'm not." Sebastian's voice cut through the noise, clear and commanding. The voice of a man who'd been trained to be heard, to be obeyed. "I'm not the Duke of Ravenscroft anymore." Silence fell over the square. "I hereby renounce my title." He spoke to the crowd, not the armed men. "I renounce all rights, privileges and holdings associated with the Dukedom of Ravenscroft. I declare Marcus Harcourt, my cousin, as the rightful heir, and relinquish all claims to the title, lands and properties therein." "You can't just—" the tall man sputtered. "I can, and I have." Sebastian pulled a paper from his pocket. He'd written it that morning by lamplight, and she'd watched him sign it with steady hands. "This document, witnessed and dated, makes it official. I am no longer a duke. I am simply Sebastian Harcourt, a man with no title, no lands, and no interest in the political machinations that have consumed the last year of my life." He handed the document to Mr. Cole, who stood near the front of the crowd. "You're a notary, sir. I trust you'll ensure this is properly recorded and filed." Mr. Cole took the paper with shaking hands, scanned it. "This is— you're serious?" "Completely." Sebastian turned back to the armed men. "So you see, gentlemen, your entire operation is now pointless. Marcus has what he wanted. The conspiracy charges lose all meaning when there's no title to seize. I'm nobody now, not worth your time or effort." The tall man looked like he'd been punched. You can't— "I already have." Sebastian took Isabel's hand, laced their fingers together. "And now, if you'll excuse us, my companion and I have a long journey ahead of us." "Wait." "Mrs." Hemsworth pushed forward. "Miss Brennan, you're leaving? With him?" Isabel looked at the woman who'd been kind to her, who'd sold her bread and made polite conversation, but who'd also perpetuated every rumor about her mother's supposed theft. "I am. But your cottage, your life here, isn't mine anymore." She said it clearly, so everyone could hear. Or rather, it never was. "I've been living in a cage of other people's judgments, other people's cruelty. So, yes, Mrs. Hemsworth, I'm leaving. With him. And I don't care what anyone thinks about it." She saw shock ripple through the crowd, saw people whispering, saw judgment and disapproval and fascination. But she also saw Thomas the apprentice start to grin, saw Mr. Cole nod slowly, something like respect in his eyes. "Good for you, lass," Mr. Cole said quietly. "Good for you." Sebastian squeezed her hand. Together they walked through the crowd, past the armed men who no longer had any reason to stop them, past the people who'd defined and limited them for so long. As they left the village behind, Isabel felt something loosen in her chest, a tightness she'd been carrying for 8 years finally releasing. "Any regrets?" Sebastian asked softly. She thought about her cottage, her careful routine, the safety of solitude. "Not yet," she said honestly. "Ask me again in a week." He laughed. and she realized it was the first time she'd heard him laugh freely since they were children. It sounded like freedom, like possibility, like home. They walked for 3 days, staying in cheap inns and eating simple food. Sebastian had some money on him, not much, but enough to get them south to a port town. They'd figure out the rest as they went. On the 4th morning, they reached a small coastal village that smelled of salt and fish. It was nothing like the grand estate Sebastian had known, nothing like Isabel's familiar countryside. It was perfect. They found a tiny cottage to rent, even smaller than Isabel's had been, with a leaking roof and a temperamental stove. The landlady quoted them a price that would drain most of their remaining funds. "We'll take it," Sebastian said without hesitation. That night they lay on the creaking bed. The cottage only had one, and they'd both been too exhausted to feel awkward about sharing it, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. "I have no idea what I'm doing," Sebastian admitted. "Neither do I." Isabel rolled onto her side to face him. "But we'll figure it out. I might be terrible at whatever work I find. I might fail spectacularly at being a normal person." "Probably," she smiled, "but you'll be failing honestly. That's worth something." He turned to look at her, and in the dim moonlight filtering through the threadbare curtains, his eyes held the same warmth she remembered from childhood. "I love you, Belle. I think I always have. And I know it's probably too soon to say it. And I don't expect you to say it back, but I needed—" She kissed him, cutting off his rambling. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "I loved you when I was 14, and thought love was stolen jam tarts and climbing trees. I hated you when I was 18 and thought hate was easier than grief. And I think I'm falling in love with you now. With who you actually are, not who I remembered or imagined." "That's terrifying," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "It is." They fell asleep like that, facing each other, close enough to share breath. And when morning came, they woke up to possibility. Sebastian found work at the shipyard, back-breaking labor that left him exhausted and sore, but also strangely satisfied. Isabel started taking in mending from local shops, building a small reputation for quality work. It wasn't easy. Some days, Sebastian came home so tired he could barely speak. Some days, Isabel lay awake wondering if they'd made a terrible mistake, if the romantic notion of starting over would crumble under the weight of reality. But there were good days too. Days when Sebastian brought home fish he'd bartered for, and they cooked it together over their temperamental stove. Days when Isabel finished a particularly challenging repair and felt genuine pride in her work. Days when they walked along the beach at sunset and remembered what it felt like to simply be. 6 months passed, then 7. One evening, as they sat on their tiny porch watching the sun sink into the ocean, Sebastian said, "I got offered a promotion to oversee the shipyard supplies. Better pay, regular hours. That's wonderful." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "They don't know who I used to be. They just know I show up on time and work hard." There was wonder in his voice. "I'm just Sebastian, nothing more." "That's all you ever needed to be." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Do you miss it? Your cottage? Your old life?" She thought about it honestly. Did she miss the solitude? The safety of knowing exactly what each day would bring? Sometimes. In small, quiet moments, she missed the simplicity of not having to worry about anyone else. But then she thought about waking up next to him, about the way he made her laugh when they were cooking, about building something together, one difficult day at a time. "No," she said. "I don't miss it. This," she gestured at the ramshackle cottage, the sunset. "Him. This is better. Harder, but better. We should get married." He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. She straightened, looked at him. "What? Married?" He turned to face her properly. "We're living together anyway, and Belle, I want it to be official. I want to stand in front of witnesses and declare that you're mine, and I'm yours, and we're choosing this. Together. You want a wedding. I want you." He cupped her face. "Forever. Officially. In whatever form that takes. So yes, I suppose I want a wedding. She should be practical." Should point out that marriage without connections or dowry was just more difficulty. But looking at him, at the man who'd given up everything to be here with her, who'd chosen honesty and hardship over comfort and lies, she couldn't find it in herself to be practical. "Yes," she said. "Yes, let's get married." His smile was brighter than the setting sun. "Really? Really?" She kissed him. "But nothing fancy. Just us and witnesses and vows that mean something. Done." They were married a week later in the local church, with the shipyard foreman and the landlady as witnesses. Isabel wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Sebastian wore work clothes, his hands still bearing calluses from the day's labor. It was nothing like the grand society wedding he might have had as a duke. There were no titled guests, no elaborate celebrations, no expensive gifts. It was perfect. That night, in their tiny cottage with the leaking roof, Sebastian held her close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For opening your door, for taking the risk, for choosing this even when it was terrifying." Isabel thought back to that rainy night 6 months ago, to the moment she'd seen him on her doorstep and made the choice to let him in. Every decision since had stemmed from that single moment of possibility. "I'd do it again," she said, "every time, even knowing how hard it would be. Especially knowing." She looked up at him. Hard and real beats easy and empty. He kissed her then, slow and thorough, and she thought about the girl she'd been, angry and walled off and desperately lonely. That girl had needed her walls to survive. But the woman she was becoming, she was learning that survival wasn't the same as living, and living required risk, required vulnerability, required the terrifying possibility of being hurt. It also made room for joy. 1 year after Sebastian had appeared on her doorstep, Isabel received a letter. She didn't recognize the handwriting at first, but when she opened it and saw the signature, her breath caught. "Dear Miss Brennan, or should I say Mrs. Harcourt now, my name is Sarah Winters. You don't know me, but I've heard your story. How you helped a man accused of treason. How you walked away from your life to build something new. I'm writing because I need help. My employer is threatening to ruin my reputation if I don't comply with his demands, and I don't know where else to turn. I realize this is presumptuous. We've never met. You have no obligation to me, but I'm desperate, and your story gave me hope that maybe, somewhere, there's still justice for women like us. If you can help, or if you can simply advise me, I would be forever grateful." The letter went on, detailing a situation painfully familiar. A young woman trapped by social expectations and male power, with no one to defend her. Isabel read it twice, then passed it to Sebastian. "What do you think?" she asked. He read it slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I think she needs help. We're barely keeping ourselves afloat. We have no resources, no connections. We have ourselves." He set the letter down. "And we know what it's like to be trapped, to feel like the world has decided your story for you." Isabel looked at the letter, at the desperate plea from a woman she'd never met. A woman who, like her, had been failed by the systems meant to protect her. "We answer it," she decided. Together. They spent the evening composing a response. Practical advice, offers of support, connections they'd made in their new life. It wasn't much, but it was something. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived, then another. Word had spread somehow that there were people willing to help, willing to listen, willing to fight for those the world had overlooked. "We could make this a regular thing," Sebastian said one evening, surrounded by letters. "Not just responding to inquiries, but actively seeking out people who need help. You could use your sewing connections. I could leverage the shipyard network. We could build something," Isabel finished, "something that matters." Yes. She thought about it, about taking the pain they'd both experienced and transforming it into something useful, about helping others find the courage to choose themselves. "We'd need more space," she said practically. "This cottage is barely big enough for the two of us, let alone running any kind of operation. Then we find more space." He grinned at her. "We've rebuilt our lives from nothing once already. We can do it again." And they did. Slowly, carefully, one letter at a time. They moved to a slightly larger cottage, found others willing to help, a lawyer who'd been disbarred for defending the poor, a widow who'd lost her husband to the same political machinations that had nearly destroyed Sebastian. It wasn't grand, wasn't revolutionary, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it mattered. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Isabel sat on their new porch reading through the day's letters, while Sebastian cooked dinner inside. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see a young woman standing hesitantly at the gate. "Mrs. Harcourt?" the woman asked nervously. "Yes, I'm Sarah Winters. I wrote to you a few months ago about my employer." Isabel set down her letters and stood. "Sarah, of course, come in, please." The young woman looked near tears. "I don't know how to thank you. Your advice, the connections you gave me, I was able to leave his employment. Find work elsewhere. I'm safe now because of you." "Because of yourself," Isabel corrected gently. "You were brave enough to ask for help, to fight for yourself. We just provided support." "Still," Sarah twisted her hands together, "I wanted to meet you, to say thank you in person and to ask," she took a breath, "if there's anything I can do to help with what you're doing. I want to help others the way you helped me." Isabel looked at this young woman, scared but determined, hurt but hopeful, and saw herself a year ago, saw the moment she'd chosen to open her door to possibility instead of slamming it shut against risk. "Come inside," she said, smiling. "Let's talk." That evening, as Sebastian served dinner to their unexpected guest, as Sarah shared her story and asked tentative questions about how they'd built this life, Isabel felt something settle deep in her chest. This was what healing looked like, not forgetting the pain, not pretending the damage hadn't happened, but taking the broken pieces and building something new, something that mattered. That night, after Sarah had left with promises to return, Sebastian found Isabel standing by the window, looking out at the dark ocean. "What are you thinking about?" He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "About that night," she said, "when you knocked on my door. Regrets?" "No." She leaned back against him, just marveling at how one choice, one terrifying, impossible choice, changed everything. "You saved my life that night." His voice was soft against her hair. "We saved each other." She turned in his arms. "You gave me permission to want more than survival. I gave you permission to be human instead of a title. We both chose the harder path because it was honest. And look where it led us." He gestured at the cottage, the letters scattered across the table, the life they'd built from nothing. "Not what either of us expected. Better," she said firmly. "Harder, but better." He kissed her forehead. "Always better with you." They stood there for a long moment, two people who'd found their way to each other through pain and chance and impossible courage, who'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous choice, to be vulnerable, to be honest, to open doors instead of slamming them, was also the one that led to freedom. Later, as they lay in bed, Sebastian said quietly, "I saw him yesterday. Marcus." Isabel went still. "Where?" "In town, from a distance. He was dressed in ducal finery, looking every inch the powerful aristocrat." A pause. "He didn't see me, and I realized I didn't feel anything. No anger, no regret, just relief that I'm not him." "Are you happy?" She asked the question that mattered most. "Truly." He thought about it, gave it the consideration it deserved. "Some days are hard. Some days I wake up and wonder what the hell we're doing, if we made the right choice, if we'll regret this when we're old." He pulled her closer. "But then I see you. I see the work we're doing. I see the life we've built from nothing but honesty and courage. And yes, Belle, I'm happy." "Are you?" Was she? She thought about her old life, the safe solitude, the predictable loneliness. Thought about who she'd been a year ago, walled off and angry and slowly dying inside her fortress. Then she thought about the letters on their table, about Sarah's grateful tears, about waking up next to the man she loved, about building something that mattered with someone who saw her completely and chose her anyway. "Yes," she said, "I'm happy." And she was. Not the uncomplicated happiness of fairy tales, where everything was perfect and easy, but the deeper, more sustainable happiness of people who'd fought for what they had, who'd chosen difficulty over comfort, because it meant choosing truth, the kind of happiness you could build a life on. Epilogue. 5 years later, on a morning that tasted of salt and possibility, Isabel opened the door of their house, no longer a cottage but a proper house now, with multiple rooms for the work they did, to find a young man standing on the step. He looked terrified and desperate and achingly familiar. "Mrs. Harcourt." His voice shook. "My name is Thomas Ashford. I was told you help people. People who've been wronged. Who need—" He trailed off, overwhelmed. Isabel saw Sebastian appear in the doorway behind her, saw him take in the young man's state with experienced eyes. "Come in," she said, stepping aside, just like she had 5 years ago, just like she would continue to do, for as long as there were people who needed doors opened instead of closed. "Let's talk." As Thomas entered, relief visible in every line of his body, Isabel caught Sebastian's eye. He smiled at her, the same smile that still made her heart skip, and she felt the now familiar surge of gratitude for that rainy night so long ago, the night she'd chosen courage over safety, the night they'd both started learning what it meant to truly live. The young man settled into their sitting room, and Isabel poured tea while Sebastian took a seat across from him. Through the window she could see the ocean stretching endlessly, full of storms and calm waters and infinite possibility. She'd opened her door to a fugitive duke once, and it had changed everything. Had taught her that the most dangerous choice, to be vulnerable, to hope, to believe in transformation, was also the one that led to the life she'd always deserved, but never thought she could have. And she'd do it again, every single time. "Now," she said, returning with the tea and sitting beside her husband, "tell us your story." And as the young man began to speak, as Sebastian took notes and she offered the compassion she'd learned from her own pain, Isabel thought about cycles breaking and wounds healing, and the small, powerful act of opening doors. It wasn't grand, wasn't legendary, but it was enough. It was everything. The end. Thank you for staying with Sebastian and Isabel's journey. Their story reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose vulnerability, with others and with ourselves. That transformation isn't about defeating external villains, but about having the courage to become who we were always meant to be. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like more stories about second chances, unlikely courage and love that heals, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Your presence here, listening to these stories, is the reason I create them. Thank you for being here.